129 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Before we begin the meeting, I want to remind all in-person participants to read the best practices guidelines on the cards that have been distributed on the tables. These measures are in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including, of course, our interpreters. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, September 6, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of the passenger rail service Via Rail Canada Inc. incident of August 31st, 2024. I'd like to begin by welcoming our witnesses. As an individual in person, we have Monsieur Cédric Coderre, passager. Bienvenue. Welcome to you, sir. And joining us virtually, we have from Unifor, Mr. Joel Kennedy, Director, Rail Sector, as well as Jennifer Murray, Director, Atlantic Region. We'll begin with opening remarks, and for that, sir, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Coderre. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and to the members of this committee. So my name is Cédric Coderre. I was a passenger on train 622, and I was in car number 2. So this is my recollection of what happened. So when the train first stopped, we were told that this was a mechanical issue. The first stop lasted about, I would say, an hour. And then we heard an announcement that they had fixed the issue and we would be able to move again, but at a slower pace. So we started moving for about, I would say, 30 minutes. And then we stopped again and they made another announcement about this, saying that there was another mechanical issue. At the time, the staff would provide us drinks and pretzels. But unfortunately, after we stopped again, I remember the staff told us that if we needed anything, we could go to the galley. So I went there. We got chocolate and alcohol. But I asked if they had anything else than pretzels, and they told us there were no more cookies or anything else. That was about, I would say, 3 hours into the train ride. We would receive pretty frequent communication about what was going on. Eventually, we were told that Train 24 was coming to a rescue. They were supposed to eventually push us to the station. At the time I was browsing the subreddit of VRA, there was a passenger actually on that train who recorded what the train conductor said. And it sounded like it was his first time doing this, which was a little bit worrying to me. And then later on, well, that really didn't end up working. So they decided to pull us to the side track to let the freight train pass. And while they were trying to connect the train, the power would go out pretty frequently, which meant the bathrooms would not work. People would still go in there, but that got pretty smelly at one point. And then eventually one of the updates we got is that they currently had no plans and they were trying to come up with one, which in my opinion is pretty worrying when you have to go somewhere and you're being told that they had no plan. But despite this, the staff in our car was pretty awesome. They kept coming through with the water, the pretzels, and the chocolate whenever we needed them. About an hour or so later, the passengers in my car started to feel a little bit restless, I'd say. Some of them were trying to look into getting a Uber out of there. Some were looking at the emergency exit. And then there were rumors that on car 1 there has been a fight. I'm not sure if it was related to the video that some of you might have seen in the media. But the police eventually came in and they escorted one guy off with his scooter. I do remember catching the discussion of some staff members and some of the passengers. And it sounded like the staff had it rough with some of the passengers in the other cars. And then eventually, about an hour later, the staff eventually disappeared in our car for about 30 minutes. There was nobody to be found. Personally, I assumed that they had a meeting with some of the other staff in a different car, so it didn't really bother me. And then train 26 eventually came by, and the firefighters came on board and started securing the area to eventually transfer us to train 26. At that time, we also got pizzas, and they were pretty generous with pizzas in my car. I think I got 4 slices, so that was good.
That's a lot of pizza.
Yes, we were quite hungry.
That's more than a snack.
Yes, it was a lot better than the pretzels. So we eventually got transferred to train 26. I saw some of the passengers had to stand up because there was not enough seats on train 26. And before we got on train 26, I do remember one of the staff member came on our car and said that this was the last water that they had, which was shortly before we got the pizzas and the extra water. So fortunately for me and my friend, we didn't really have anywhere to be that day. We were just planning to visit Quebec City. I know a lot of people on the train had a cruise to catch. One of the VRI staff was looking for those people. They were taking names. I'm not exactly sure what happened with that. That's about it.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Coder. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coder.
Opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair and committee members. Unifor is the largest private sector union in Quebec and Canada, representing more than 320,000 members in all sectors of the economy. We represent more than 9,200 members in the rail sector, and 2,000 of those members are via rail workers, including maintenance workers, onboard staff, sales agents, and customer service staff. My name is Jennifer Murray. I'm Unifor's Atlantic Regional Director, and I come from a history of railway workers and am a proud Via Rail worker myself for 28 years. 9 of those years I worked representing Via Rail workers as a union representative. I'm joined here today by Joel Kennedy, Unifor's Rail Sector Director. A few weeks back, we saw a Via Rail train stopped and delayed passengers for more than 10 hours. I would like to say these delays are a very rare occurrence. However, that would not be true. While delays this long bring attention from politicians, delays like this occur frequently. My comments today are not just this single event, but the lack of planning for delays of all sorts along our rail system. Delays caused by climate change, related weather events, breakdowns, train blockages, and freight traffic. Via Rail's mission recognizes that passengers must come first, but its focus has been on the impacts of potential crisis on infrastructure, not passenger experience. Via's mission includes the line, "Our primary focus is our passengers. We work on improving our services and redefining Via Rail to provide our passengers with the most enjoyable travel experience and to find better ways to connect Canadian communities. Safety is and will remain paramount." The key to putting passengers first is to ensure employees can provide the services that passengers pay for and need in transit, but also in the face of unexpected interruptions to service. Unfortunately, implementing regressive billing changes, charging people for additional baggage, limiting access to free amenities, and attempting to cut back on employees who serve travelers, providing minimum support in case of delays, are hardly what we would call passengers first. Via Rail also claims that current operational safety management system exceeds compliance standards and is a leader in industry practices. If this is true, industrial regulations of the rail sector need a major revision. VIA's environment plan for 2030 focuses on potential climate and environmental impact on operations, but focuses entirely on infrastructure. Safety and security should include injury prevention and infrastructure upgrades, but also how it is going to respond to those crises at the time of the crisis. Resilience is a word we use these days to define the goal of responding to impacts on rail infrastructure. For Via Rail, where we rely on those who own and operate tracks we run on, we have limited room to provide a service that is actually resilient. As such, Via Rail must focus on ensuring that there are always resources available to deal with interruptions in service caused by underinvestment in the rail sector, resulting in low levels of resilience of our rail infrastructure. For these longer interruptions, ensuring passengers and crew have access to food, water, temperature-controlled areas, working facilities, and alternative transport options falls solely on Via Rail. It was disappointing to hear the CEO say that there would be a review of training requirements to ensure employees are better equipped for difficult situations. When Via Rail is constantly pressured to reduce costs rather than have consultation to improve service, the decision in the past was made to reduce staff and cut services on board. They operate very lean. We don't have proper plans in place to address food, water, and facilities in the face of a crisis. Training is not the fix when Via Rail has not properly stocked the train. This type of situation leaves workers facing harassing type behavior from understandably frustrated passengers. It is the frontline workers who know the issues and what passengers are saying in these desperate times and should be consulted when decisions are being made and actions implemented. For years, frontline workers have been asking Via Rail for backup plans for times when staff is lean and they are known to be busy. But this dialogue always seems to fall on deaf ears. It is no secret that our rail lines in Canada were built to support freight trains. They run through some very remote areas, causing challenges when breakdowns occur. However, there must be proper protocol in place for when these situations arise, because they will. The lack of communication, lack of food and water has always been a problem. And who are the faces that must endure these decisions? The people who choose to travel with Via Rail and the workers, leaving a lasting effect on everyone. We do not have control over the tracks, the weather, or other trains on the system. We do have control over the resources put into ensuring a safe experience for passengers and crews. Unifor has long called for priority for Via Rail and for investment in track twinning so that disruptions like this can be avoided, routed around. We know that Canadians were promised and deserve a passenger rail system that is accessible, reliable, and affordable. Unifor believes that this can be achieved by implementing a Via Rail Act. In the medium term, it is essential that the government provide the resources to make these recommendations a reality and make the investment expected by the public to ensure a resilient, on-time, safe, and comfortable experience for travelers, one that plans for potential crisis situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murray. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Before I start the questioning, I would like to thank both the witnesses for being here. I do have one brief but important request of the committee. I'm hoping we can dispense this quickly with unanimous consent. I'm sure we all saw and were troubled greatly by the news article that came up with respect to the Chippewa First Nation. And according to the article, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, the Mikisew Cree First Nation, the 4 Chippewa Métis Nations were never told that the environment around the big dock, as it's colloquially referred to, was contaminated, despite a report commissioned by the government in 2017 that found elevated levels of arsenic, nickel, and hydrocarbons. My request is simple. We had thought about maybe holding an emergency session, but before that, in order not to upend the schedule, what we would propose to do on unanimous consent is to request from Transport Canada all documents, including the 2017 report since 2017, relating to the, as it's colloquially known, the big dock in the Chippewa First Nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Looking around the room with a lot of confused and questioning faces, so if you'll permit, I will suspend for 5 minutes while everyone confers. The meeting is suspended, and I would like to thank the witnesses for their patience as we discuss this.
If we can't dispense a bit quickly,
again to our witnesses for their patience. So I'll now turn it back over to you, Mr. Lawrence, for your line of questioning. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the witnesses coming here today. Mr. Cordair, am I saying that right, first of all? Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for taking the time and sharing it with us. I want to go through a little bit in some of the details, and it seems like you handled the situation better than other passengers. But did you feel like you were adequately communicated with during the delay?
I would say so, but it kind of depends how you see it, right? They would give frequently updates, but some of the updates were like either we don't have an update, or we don't have any news, or we don't currently have a plan, which might introduce a bit more stress for the other passengers. I've gone through a lot of delays. I travel a lot through either train or planes, so I'm used to it, so it doesn't really stress me that much.
Yeah. So Justin, they actually have twigged me to something else. If you don't mind me asking these questions. Well, you said you travel quite a bit, internationally, domestically. If you're okay sharing with us.
Yes, it's actually both. I go to Vancouver every month, and I do about 2 to 3 trips internationally every year.
How would you compare your experience in Canadian airports, Canadian trains, with some of the counterparts around the world, if you'd be so kind to share that with us?
So around the world, from what I've noticed, there is not really any delays compared to what we're used to. I frequently fly with Air Canada, within Air Canada, and there's always very often delays. Same thing with Via Rail. I recently went to South Korea, and I took the train there, and they were always on time, which was quite impressive. And they have about like 30 trains a day from every cities, and they were always on time.
Thank you for that. And just to sum, so it's fair to say that your experience is that it's certainly above you had more delays in Canada than what you've experienced internationally on average. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. We just want to move on to a little bit more of your experience, and apologies on behalf of the federal government that you had to go through this, right? As a member of Parliament here. You said that they had food, but it was relatively limited, like pretzels and stuff. Like at the beginning, did they have like sandwiches or anything, or you were just on pretzels for 10 hours or so?
So I was actually in business class, so I got a breakfast earlier on while the train was fine. But I imagine for the people in economy, they probably had only the pretzels for the whole time.
And then
I couldn't speak on.
I don't want to get too far down the line in grossness here, but you mentioned the washrooms got a little bit stinky. For how long were they, if you remember, how long were they not working? And I assume there was a point where they were just not usable for obvious reasons. But
I would say about an hour. The bathrooms were never closed, so even if they were stinky, people kept going there because I guess they really needed to go there.
Yeah, perfect. If I could just switch to you, Ms. Murray. You mentioned a couple things that I'll tell, at least to my understanding, directly contradicted what the CEO of Via, who was here a couple weeks ago, he said a number of times this was an isolated incident. Would you agree with that, or would you? Yeah, would you agree with that? I'll leave it there.
So thanks. I worked with the railway for a very long time, and I would say these super long delays, I wouldn't call it isolated. I would say less rare than other delays, but I would never call this an isolated one-off. This happens more than it should, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. And you said something that that I thought about and was a little surprised at the CEO's. He seemed to indicate that it would have been difficult or impossible to put enough food on a train for a prolonged delay. I'm just wondering if you had, with your considerable experience, would agree with that analysis, or whether it'd be possible to, just have granola bars or something. It's a little bit more nutritious than pretzels.
Yeah. Let's be honest, there probably is not enough space for there to be full meals put on the train, but supplies to, like you said, granola bars, something with sustenance, something that if you are delayed, because this is not the first time, to be prepared in the event that there is going to be long delays, that pretzels are not going to hold over. And for, even at the end of the day, for somebody to be walking through a car and saying, this is the last bit of water we have on this train, I think is quite revealing. But there, if there isn't room, we need to make room. We've got to find a way. There has to be a way that we're transporting humans here, and there's got to be a way to provide them with the necessities that they need when there are, significant delays such as these ones.
Your comment about we are transporting humans here, I think that's very well fitting, and I just would like to thank both of you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Diacono. Monsieur.
And now, Mr. Diacono. Mr. Diacono, over to you for 6 minutes.
You mentioned that the train stopped on 3 occasions. During these 3 occasions, you also mentioned that you did hear some notices. Just to get a better understanding on that, the notices came how often? So in your first hour, when did you hear the first notice of what was happening?
I would say about 5 minutes right after it stopped, we got a notice.
And can you give us a better understanding of when were the next ones? How frequent were they?
So early on, it was about every 30 minutes or so.
So in the first hour, you got only 2 notices then?
Yeah.
Okay. And in the next half hour, when you said the train stopped again, how many notices did you get?
I think we got 2 as well.
Okay. And in the last half hour? You
1.
got only 1? Okay. At any time during those notices, were you given any indication of safety measures? Any indication as to you can get off the train? Any indicators as to if you needed help of some sort to call anybody? What were the messages that you were getting consisting of?
So I would say the first message was about the cause of the train stopping, and then most of the other messages were either we have no updates, or eventually it became we had no plans yet.
You mentioned the staff on board were great, were helpful. Did you notice any incidents or any wrongdoing in that staff that was in car number 2?
No, they were all great.
Everybody was okay?
Yeah.
How about the other passengers? What was the reaction of this with respect to the situation?
So the other passengers seemed to be on edge. It sounded like they were pretty stressed about their obligations when they would get there. So some of them were trying to figure out a way to get off the train, either getting a Uber or looking at the emergency exits, or just calling 911.
Did you ever feel at that point in time when you were stuck in danger?
No.
Okay. Thank you for your responses, and I direct my questions to the union. So you've been with the VIA for 25 years, right? Or so? Was
Yes.
or were? Sorry.
Was.
Okay.
Still am an employee.
Okay, so I too was an ex-employee. I was in labor relations and I dealt with collective agreements 1 and 3. So with maintenance as well as onboard personnel. So when it came to the safety management plans and protocols, were they respected?
they kept them on board because my understanding is that it wasn't safe for them to detrain until they made the situation, secured the scene and the situation. So to transfer them to the other train. So, I mean, it's never safe. It's never a safe experience when when they're running out of water and safe facilities and all of that. But
What communications practices were exercised that day?
I wasn't on board as far as communications go. We always struggle, especially, at our call center with people calling and looking for information. It's never easy for workers when they have to deal with these types of situations.
I know you were not on board, but after the event, you must have had some conversations with the employees on board, and you may have also got some wind of some documentation with respect to practices of that day. So you'd have no idea of what type of communications were going around?
Well, as far as Mr. Coder has outlined, is what we're hearing, is they made frequent announcements like they do, they made the announcements to the passengers with the information that they had, which was very limited.
As union representative, what measures have you taken, or what have you done after the incident with respect to the employees concerned, especially the employees that were whose conduct was questionable?
I didn't hear that any conduct was questionable from any of the employees.
We heard from one of the testimonies from our testimony here today, that there may have been an incident in the other cart, as well as we saw a video going out of one of the VIA employees lashing out towards a passenger. So, what action was taken by you or by the by VIA? What disciplinary measures were taken?
I'm not certain what disciplinary measures were taken. All I can say is that's a true indication of what happens in situations like this when they're not prepared for what they're about to face.
You're trying to say you're not aware of any incident occurring that day?
I'm not aware of any disciplinary measure.
Not disciplinary measure, of any incident with the employees towards the passengers.
I'm not aware of any misconduct from that day.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murray, and thank you, Mr. Iacono. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
And now, Mr. Barcelou Duval, over to you for 6 minutes, please. I'm waiting to hear the sound. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to both witnesses. We would have loved to have more passengers today, but we're glad we have Mr. Coder today. Their perspective is important in an incident like this one. It's important to have all versions. We had version of management. We're having the version of the union, and we'll have that of the passengers. Each version is different, and I think that in the end, we draw much closer to the truth by hearing all versions. The thing I'd like to start discussing with you, Mr. Coder, are you frequent traveler with Via Rail? Yes. During the appearance, the management, Via Rail management mentioned that this was an isolated incident. What happened? Now, from your perspective, was this really an isolated incident from the because of the duration of the delay? Have you ever experienced a delay of this magnitude? With Via Rail, 12 hours delay, I would say is not frequent at all, but 1 hour, 2 hours, 2-hour delays are quite frequent. Thank you. So, what we realize when we look at these reports is that there are major problems in terms of delays, and we understand that this was an extreme case. The other thing I'd like to clarify with you, because you talked about what you received. So you were in there was the car number 122, 126, and 124. So you were on 124? No, I was on 622. So you were part of those who were held for over 10 hours. So what you mentioned is that you had a meal at the start of the trip, and then you had chocolates and pretzels during the stop, and that you received food sometime around when train car number 2026 arrived. So what's the duration between the meal that was served up until the moment you received the pizza? I'll say about 6 to 7 hours. Thank you, 6 to 7 hours. So the thing that I find really particular here is, and this was mentioned, we were told that cars are supposed to have reserves in water and food in case of any accidents or delays, which appears to be normal. But I have a hard time understanding that during all this time, people were fed with pretzels and chocolates. Do you think that this is what should be offered to people, or more should be done? I think there should be more food for people's nourishments, more anyway, but more than just chocolates and pretzels. In terms of water, you mentioned that after 10 hours, they had run out of water. And of course, you cannot ask people to have reserves for 6 months. But I mean, using your common sense as a citizen, what do you think would be a reasonable amount of water in reserves that they should have and distribute during an incident like this? What would be your expectations? I would say a minimum of 12 hours reserves for 12 hours, especially since you never know if such a situation will reoccur. Thank you. I'll carry on with the union representatives. So, Ms. Murray, you mentioned a moment ago that in your opinion, it is false what management said, that this was an isolated incident. Do you have any data or information on the number of incidents that have happened with prolonged hours? Because I think we would understand 30-minute delays, and this is different from 4 to 5 to 6 hour delays. And of course, there's something that needs to be done. Now, internally, as a union member, do you have any further data on that?
I don't have numbers per se, but I can say, so I work on I worked at Via Rail here in the East Coast in the Atlantic, and that train is notoriously late, many, many, many hours. And so I would say that although I don't have data, I would agree that in the corridor region, delays of 10, 12 hours are less rare than delays like that in the long service trains, but certainly not isolated, I would argue.
So this is something that happens quite frequently. Maybe I'm expressing myself wrongly. So first of all, it's unacceptable that this should be a regular occurrence. But how comes it that if this happens that frequently, that there's not enough reserves in order to address people's food and drinking needs? Has there been any discussions internally on these issues?
No, I agree with, I understand what the president has said, what the CEO has said, that there's not a lot of space on board to keep huge reserves, but it's not only long delays where they're running out of, of supplies. So, I don't think that they're properly stocked anyway, let alone for delays of, significant amount of hours.
Another question for you. You've all experienced stressful situations, and people who work, train staff have a hard time, but did they receive some form of compensation where they paid? I imagine that they were paid for the overtime during this incident.
They would have been paid as per the guidelines in the collective agreement. It's not something that I have asked as far as how they were paid, but it is covered in the collective agreement how they are compensated.
Ms. Murray, merci beaucoup, Mr. Bach.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Coderre, you and I were speaking just before the meeting, and you told me that you had reviewed some of the testimony from the previous meeting with Via Rail. And so I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question regarding your impression of that testimony. In Via Rail's characterization of the incident and their handling of it, was there anything that stood out to you as being inconsistent with your experience on the train?
That is a good question. So I remember, how could I say that? The one thing that really stood out from the testimony, it was I know. I'm just trying to remember. Is it okay if we come back to that question later?
That's fine. I'm curious as well. You talked about how some of the updates on the train were updates to say, hey, we don't have a plan right now. We're trying to come up with a plan, and how that might have alarmed some passengers that the company responsible for the train didn't have a plan at that given point in time. I think there's potentially another view, which is that the more honest and forthcoming the company can be and the more transparent, maybe it would build trust among the passengers that they're going to get updates regardless whether it's good news or bad news. As a passenger, which of those would you prefer? Would you prefer frequent updates even if it's bad news or no news?
Yeah, probably actually.
Okay.
But ideally, I would say if they can avoid getting to the point where they have no plans, that would be ideal.
I think we all want to avoid getting to the point where we have no plan. Certainly my approach. How did Via Rail compensate you for the inconvenience?
So I got a 100% credit, travel credit, and I also got refunded.
And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if this was news to other members of the committee. I hadn't heard in previous testimony about the police escorting someone off the train. And I'm just wondering, you said this occurred in a different car. Yeah. This was something you heard secondhand, or is there any information about that you can share with us?
So it was from car one, and I actually saw the person get escorted off. I couldn't say why or what happened. But I did see someone get off the train with the police.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coderre. If I could turn now to Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, I'm curious whether your members who were involved in this incident, who were responsible for dealing with it, and I should preface this by saying and just reflecting on Mr. Coderre's comment that he felt that the staff did an awesome job under the circumstances, and certainly that's been my experience on Via Rail. But I'm curious if the employees who were involved in this very stressful situation reached out to the union afterwards to convey any concerns.
Certainly not to our offices directly, but I don't want to say that they didn't. I don't know for sure. I would say that that this wasn't as off the wall as as we're led to believe this incident. But so I can't say with great certainty, Taylor, how to answer that.
Your point about the need for Via Rail's planning to include how they handle situations like this in the moment and how passengers and employees are taken care of is very important. Is Unifor engaged with Via Rail in its climate resilience planning? And to what extent?
I'll defer this to Joel. He's our sector director, so he will have more information on this than I will.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mr. Backrash, I would say that myself as the National Rail Director has not been consulted with Via Rail in regards to their plans as of yet.
Obviously, the committee has the ability to make recommendations to inform the government's role in preparing for these kinds of incidents. What would be your recommendation on the part of Unifor when it comes to improving Via Rail to the government's role? How can ensure that Via Rail is better prepared in the future?
Well, certainly, and I will say that when different entities that are regulated under the Canadian Rail Scheme, when there's changes being made, when there's consultations that happen, and it's mandatory through changes to the Railway Act or any of our regulation, we're consulted as stakeholders, and we bring a very good perspective into that regard. So if we were consulted in an instance like this, we would have an expert like Jennifer available to provide her recommendations when it comes to food, when it comes to training, when it comes to emergency preparedness. However, we've been cut of this process with Via at this point.
She indicated earlier that she didn't feel like training was the issue. Personnel and human resources on board the train. Is that a fair characterization? Or
I think that I think you understand that point crystal clear. And from the feedback that I've always received is it's our members that are really holding the train together in these types of situations. When we talk about lack of water or, lack of storage space, this is a train. We can couple another car onto it that's possibly refrigerated or have some space to allow the storage that they have. So I would absolutely say that this is a funding problem and not a training problem. And I will emphasize that our members are the ones that are holding this train together in these types of situations with very little resource.
And thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next, we have Mr. Viss. Mr. Viss, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Coder, thanks for being here today. Would you support a similar type of passenger bill of rights that we've seen passed for the airlines in Canada to ensure when a situation happens like this again, that passengers know that it's not okay for a service provider not to meet a specific service standard for passengers in Canada?
Yes, I would say that would be pretty useful.
Thank you. I'll ask the same question to either Mr. Kennedy or Ms. Murray as well.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, sir.
Support a passenger bill of rights similar to what we have seen passed for airlines in Canada.
Certainly.
In your opening comments, you talked about climate or environmental impacts on service disruptions in Canada. Can you give us some specific examples, please?
Well, I think that we have to be aware of what climate change is bringing, washed out tracks and those types of situations that will cause great delays. We have, like I also said, our infrastructure goes through some very remote areas, and we've seen it up north. We've seen it in other places where climate certainly, has a definite impact on our infrastructures everywhere.
In respect to infrastructure, the need for track twinning, would Unifor have any specific examples where we could twin our tracks to avoid further service disruptions for the rail companies?
So I'll hand this over to Joel, if you're good with that, Joel.
Certainly, and thank you. And I will say that, for a long period of time now, we, Via Rail and passenger services boring off freight tracks, and that's a problem for us. So we talk about twinning tracks. It's maybe not saying that we need twin passenger rail tracks. We need dedicated passenger rail tracks. Right now, we're running on freight tracks. We're second priority when it comes to passenger rail. So we need dedicated trackage in Canada. And for emergency situations, those tracks ought to be twinned for situations just as we've seen that we're talking about here today.
Conclude, what would Unifor see as the biggest takeaways from the delay we witnessed this summer? And just please reiterate what we can be doing at this committee in terms of specific recommendations to avoid further service disruptions for Canadian passengers.
Certainly, and I'll take that one. We've focused on track infrastructure, but what we're not focusing on is passengers. And Jennifer outlined that in her presentation today, is that we seem to be lacking passengers emergency response plans and preparedness. And I will bring to the Greyhound is, a Greyhound bus breaks down, another bus is immediately dispatched. That's not what happened in this case. And so we look at trackage, we look at that type of infrastructure, but what we need to be looking at is the companies and the government's regulations surrounding emergency preparedness and emergency plans in these types of situations. In our view, that is lacking.
How much time left? I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viss. Next, we'll go to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our witnesses today. First off, Mr. Coderre, I guess I'll come to you for a couple of questions. In the previous meeting, we had the Via Rail management people here who apologized profusely and acknowledged that this kind of thing is unacceptable and shouldn't be happening, even though Transport Canada has invested previously some good dollars in Via Rail, and the train that you were on, I understand, is a relatively new train. So for that new infrastructure to fail like that is certainly unacceptable. So, as a passenger on the train, there was some compensation offered, as you referenced, cash refund and price of a one-way ticket or whatever to some destination. Was that enough compensation in your mind to satisfy you and certainly the other passengers that you might have talked to on the train? It just seems to me that compensation is kind of lacking.
I would say it was lacking. I think at first it felt generous, but when you think about it, the travel credit, for most of the passengers that were on the train, they're probably not going to use this within 12 months. The unfortunate part of those credits is that they expire within 12 months.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And you also referenced, of course, the circumstances that you endured for that 10 hours with the lack of food and just basics, drinks, pretzels, that kind of thing. And even though that was, I guess, something that you would appreciate at that time before you were later served some pizza. So there was no opportunity in your mind where passengers may have been able to be unloaded from that train?
It didn't seem like there would have been. I remember when it transferred us to the other train, it looked like we were pretty high up on the highway. So a lot of the passengers would not have been able to easily get off the train.
And I'm assuming there were probably people with disabilities on that train as well.
Yes.
Which would have made it extremely difficult.
Yes.
Yeah. And how did they endure that 10 hours in your mind? Were they really challenged?
I would say it was probably rougher for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Ms. Murray, if I could ask you, following this event, and of course you saw the previous testimony by Via Rail officials and so on, did your union get any kind of comprehensive report or suggestions from all the staff from that particular train about maybe how to deal with this kind of a similar event in the future. Were there any suggestions or recommendations coming in from your staff about what they endured and how to possibly avoid this situation, or to give them more support to be able to deal with the passengers?
I personally haven't seen anything directly from the staff. I, would say this is probably not the first time some of these folks have experienced this type of delay. But myself, I have not seen any report or anything that has come through from the membership from that particular train.
Something that your union would want to engage in with all these staff members to see if they've got some future recommendations or suggestions to deal with this kind of situation?
I think it's a great idea. I also think it's a very good idea for VIA to engage in this type of conversation with our staff and with their workers, because it is really important that they hear how this can be approached and done better. It is VIA who will be implementing these things, and should certainly demonstrate to the workers that they care enough to hear from them.
It seems. Mr. Kadir, to deal with this kind of situation, and things were sort of developed and coordinated effort to deal with the folks on the train. So perhaps it's something that your union could make a recommendation to us as a committee. Would it?
Sure.
Mr. Kadir.
We would love to put something together for this committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Murray. We look forward to receiving any suggestions that you'd like to share with us. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelona.
And then we have Mr. Barcelona Duval for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will continue with my line of questioning with you, Ms. Murray. Earlier on, well, not earlier on, but 2 years ago, there was a major stop that was highly mediatized during the holiday season. We're referring to a train that stopped for over 14 hours, which was similar to what we experienced in September 2024, where there were no more communications, shortage of food, etc. But in December 2022, when we received VRL officials, they said there was going to be an investigation, that there were going to be changes in their protocols and so on and so forth. And I'd like to ask you, do you know anything that changed internally on the heels of that, after that event, maybe at the level of the staff, or nothing changed at all?
I myself don't know of any changes. I know that from many years of, these long delays, there has come a decision of more frequent communication, which which Mr. Coderre has explained, that even if there was no information, there was still an announcement made. However, I can't say that I am aware of any changes that have come as a result of those delays around the holiday period, because I think there was actually more than one.
Thank you for your answer. My second question has to do with the more recent event that was experienced on Labor Day. And now the staff, it is as difficult for the staff as it is for the passengers to find yourself between a rock and a hard place. But did you get any reports from the staff or the people working on the train on the quality of communications with management? I mean, what did it sound like? Could you tell us more about the state of communications?
I think what was communicated on the train was what was being communicated to the staff, that there was no plan, and therefore that's what would have been communicated to the passengers on board. So likely frustrating, but that's what the staff would have been aware of as well.
Merci.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Extra fair to the block and the NDP and just give them 5 minutes as opposed to 2 minutes. This is their last round with that.
I'm
But
fine with
if
that
you need
there's
it,
no
if you
objection.
don't, that's okay.
Est-ce que vous voulez encore plus de temps, Monsieur Barcelou-Duval?
Do you want more time, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, if there's no objection from the other parties? Well, I think I'd already completed my list of questions. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Chair, I could go on for quite a while.
Never mind. It's a dangerous proposition, Mr. Bachrach. If you do need additional time, just give me the signal, and
thanks.
we'll be glad to give that to you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to our witnesses. I've got a couple more questions. One was related to the 2022 incident that Mr. Barcelou-Duval referenced in his last question, and a question to Ms. Murray. I'm curious whether Unifor was engaged substantively in the aftermath of that incident, and whether your employees were part of providing input that could inform the government's response. I understand that the minister, required certain changes, and VIA made certain changes based on those requirements and based on their own assessment of the incident. Was Unifor engaged in that work?
Not to my knowledge. I obviously would have just been starting this role, but not to my knowledge, Mr. Bachrach, that Unifor was engaged. Perhaps at the local level, the union was engaged, but certainly not at the higher levels within the union. Joel, if I'm mistaken, you can certainly jump in and correct me here.
Certainly, no, we were not consulted, and generally in our history, we're not consulted unless the companies are compelled to consult us. There's generally no voluntary consultation when it comes to these types of situations, which would lead me to my previous comment to you is, as stakeholders, we need to be a part of this process. It's important. We bring valuable information up from the ranks, through our health and safety committees that we have access to when we're consulted. But the problem is there's nothing compelling these companies to consult with the union, and that's problematic for us.
So I think that, shifting gears a little bit, I think that there are certainly points being made about how Via Rail could have been better prepared for this kind of incident. My question is whether, given the constraints that were, they can't change that in the moment, based on the provisions that were available, based on the circumstances as you understand them, did Via's personnel do the best that they could given the limitations? Or were there ways that you felt that they should have responded, the company should have responded differently, even given the constraints?
So I will say that the onboard staff on those trains are only trained for a limited time and limited situations and scenarios. So when we talk about a 2 or 3 hour delay, which really should be on the high end of things, that's what our members are trained to deal with. So when we're dealing with large emergencies or larger delays, our members are often leaning to management or the company for direction on how to govern those situations. So again, I would point to the resources that are coming from the company's perspective and assisting our members in these types of very unique situations. So again, planning, training, and the proper resources.
We've talked about, the need for greater investment to ensure that there are adequate human on board the trains. Is the making in Via Rail writ large, or is the issue Via Rail's allocation of the resources they're provided by the government?
That's a really great question. I would say allocation, because there's been a major push, and expenditure on infrastructure, but obviously we're not seeing it into their their plans and their trainings and their passenger related systems. Yes, they bought trains. Yes, they may be looking at some high frequency rail, but what else have they done to support their passengers and their emergency preparedness? I mean, this incident happened in a very populous part of the country. What if this happened in northern Manitoba, where there was nothing around and it wasn't -40? So I think that we've got very lucky in this situation. We need to learn from this situation, and we need to look at the internal plannings and emergency preparedness of Via Rail.
Thank you, Mr. Backrack. Next, we'll go to Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for the witnesses being here. I really appreciate it. I'm going to start out with the question for Unifor. Of course, not too long ago, in my riding in Cobourg, a Via Rail broke down under different circumstances. It wasn't mechanical, but weather this time. But there was a commissioned independent report. And there were a number of recommendations in those, and I was just wondering if Unifor had a position with respect to whether those recommendations have been adopted satisfactorily or whether there's still work to be done.
For myself, I haven't been privy to that report as of yet, so I apologize, I cannot answer that question.
Marie, as well, are you aware? Is there anything you'd like to add?
I also have not seen that report, so I'm unable to respond as well.
That would be something I think that that VIA would be sharing with you, and hopefully working collaboratively with the workers that obviously keep the trains going. A little surprised they haven't, but thank you for that. I do want to say well, it was definitely awful for the passengers, and I'll have another question for Mr. Coderre in a second. It must have also been very, very difficult for the employees there, as stuck in the middle. It can be very difficult to be in a position where you're expected to help, but you don't have the tools to help people. And I'm just would first of all like to say a thank you to the VIA workers who conducted themselves professionally, and all the rail workers who do that. Do you, and perhaps I'm putting you in an unfair position, but that's what politicians do, do you believe that VIA set your workers up for failure by having a lack of resources and a lack of plan with respect to this delay?
And I will comment, and I'm sure that Jen might also have a comment on this, but it is their employer's responsibility to keep the health safety of our members in check. That is their responsibility under the labor code, under the law. And so, yes, I would say that their lack of investment absolutely put our members in harm's way that day.
That another member asked you questions with respect to what you received as compensation. I believe you received a refund and then a ticket as well, or a free pass as well. Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, travel credit.
Okay, perfect. And so were you made aware of, or is there, to your knowledge, a complaint resolution? Like if you had wanted something more than that, did VIA advise to you that there was any right or any process that you could go through to acquire a greater compensation for your 10-hour delay?
No, they have not.
Okay, so it was they gave you the refund and I guess what do you call it, a ticket pass, or what was it?
Travel credit.
Travel credit, and that was that, and
yeah,
okay, and so I want to also get just briefly back to some of your testimony with respect to the international travel you've done. So you said in South Korea that the trains were rarely on time, and you also had some testimony with respect to VIA. But I want to ask you, I guess, a specific question here, just in your own estimation, in your own anecdotal experience there. How often is a Canadian train, whether it be VIA or otherwise, late? Is 50% of the time, 20% of the time, 10% of the time?
For when I took it, I would say about 40% of the time that it's late.
So about 40% of the time it was not on time, right? And I've got to imagine that's pretty challenging for you and for all members or for all passengers to be that type of late. Does that discourage you from maybe taking the VIA? If, like this time you were just, I understand, visiting Quebec City, but if you had an important business meeting, would you think twice about getting onto a VIA train?
So I typically take the train to get to the Montreal airport, and so what I do, I take the earliest train. So I try to have like a buffer of like 6 to 8 hours in case they have a big delay.
So you have to put an additional 6 to 8. I mean, it's good planning, and you're obviously a smart guy. But you have to add 6 to 8 hours if you want extra to take the train to hang out at the airport. And
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Prochainement, et finalement pour aujourd'hui, on va aller avec Monsieur Lauzon.
Next, Mr. Lauzon. Over to you for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Mary. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Coder for being there today. I'll start immediately with Ms. Mary. So you have a lot of experience, and you talked about the issues that we experience with the multiple stops from Via Rail. You spoke most especially about problems in remote areas, especially with harsh weather conditions. Now, how have things evolved over time, especially with climate change?
So, I mean, there's a number of factors, I believe. Climate change is one of those things that I think we have to recognize. Certainly difficult to control the weather. However, we do have infrastructure that we need to upgrade, and we've been very vocal about that here at Unifor. Infrastructure as far as tracks go, infrastructure as far as our train cars go. We've had many issues in the northern part of New Brunswick where there's tracks that are in ill repair. They're not our tracks, so they're not Via Rail's tracks. They're owned by CN Rail. So we are very reliant on the people who own the tracks to keep them upgraded. And then obviously the infrastructure with the cars and the problems that we have there. So it's not only, I know you've asked about climate change, but I think that we're facing it, and we just can't deny it. And things like washouts and those kinds of things are things that we're going to see more frequently.
You just talked about floods. We talked about high temperatures that lead trees to fall on the tracks. Have you had experiences where trains were interrupted as a result of storms?
Yes. So a few years ago, I apologize, I don't know the exact year, but when I was working as the union representative representing Via Rail workers in that travel on the ocean between Halifax and Montreal, there was an ice storm, and many of the trees had fallen on the tracks, and it was a very difficult time for our passengers and for our crew members to try to keep people safe, keeping people away from windows and all of those things, because many of the trees were just laying over, and the train was passing through at a slow speed, but still was a very difficult time, which delayed the train greatly as well. And at that time, I do want to say that the union went to the company and begged them to listen at that time to the workers and what their experience was like. And so we sat down in a room and we actually did that. And the workers were able to actually talk to the employer and express their concerns and how we can improve upon things in the future.
Mr. Coder, you mentioned in your testimony that it didn't seem like they were organized at all and the staff didn't know what to do. At what point did that start? Was it immediately when it started, or when the train kicked off and stopped again, or when you were transferring from one car to the other? I'd say it started about 4 hours after waiting. The first 4 hours were okay. You received good service. Well, in general, I think we received good service in spite of the circumstances. So you also mentioned that supplies were a problem, and there were fewer snacks available in the beginning, but you at least had the opportunity to eat some pizza. At what time did it? When did it come? Did it come with the train that came to assist you, or did it come by land? I think it came by land. I don't know really how it arrived, but one solution that VRL could use in future is potentially to order pizzas or water or something else much sooner instead of waiting for 8 hours before doing that. Now, coming back to water, just to make sure I understood you properly, you said you ran out of resources, but it was towards the end that you ran out of water, right? Yes. And now, in your car, did you have any persons with special needs, people who would have required medical attention, and people who would have required more attention from the Via Rail staff? Well, not in my car, not in car number 2. So, in terms of staff behavior, the first 4 hours, top service, the service was good, and the frustrations pile up as a result of the fact that they didn't know what to do. I'd say that it's not so much the staff, but more to do with the company, which did not give coherent messages. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon.
There was a mention of the fact that sometimes these trains could be stuck in areas where they don't have access to being able to order pizzas. This past summer, I was able to tour the Gagetown training facility in New Brunswick, and they showed me the storage where they store the food packets that they provide to our soldiers as they're going through their training. These last 6 months to a year, they're freeze-dried foods. They fit into very small packages, and I'm wondering, to you, Mr. Coder, and then to you, Ms. Murray, do you think that this is perhaps a solution where every train can have freeze-dried meals for every single person in there that don't have to be heated? They just are able to be opened up and eaten. Is that something you think would have been a good solution to have in place during your incident?
I think so. Something with more sustenance would have been better, and that would probably have done the trick, yeah.
Thank you. And Ms. Murray, do you think that would have been something that would have been helpful for the staff and the team?
I think being able to offer, anything with any sustenance would have been very helpful. I think that it would certainly, we could find space for something like that without needing refrigeration, et cetera. And I think it's not a terrible idea to look at for sure.
Colleagues, for allowing me the opportunity to ask that question. On behalf of all members of our committee, I want to thank you, Mr. Coder, as well as you, Ms. Murray, and you, Mr. Kennedy, for appearing before us and for providing your feedback on how we can ensure that this does not happen again, or we are better prepared when it does. With that, I'd like to ask the witnesses to log off. Thank you very much. You can be dismissed now, and we will stick around to have a discussion relating to the motion put forward by Mr. Lawrence. I will suspend for 2 minutes as we do that. Thank you. colleagues, thanks for your patience with this. I want to confirm with everyone that the motion put forward by Mr. Lawrence has been now distributed in both official languages. And so that's out of the way. And I believe now that that's been done, we actually might have unanimous consent. Do we have unanimous consent to adopt the motion? Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, colleagues. You made that easy. And the meeting is now adjourned.